the issue today is Israel and Hamas, but on other days will be other issues, and it's between what one might call the moderate old guard and the progressive new guard. And we just heard a couple of those voices. It's a major division, and it will determine the future Democratic Party and to some extent the future of the United States. It's worth noting, in contrast, the Republican Party, which owns 50-50 with the Democrats in the Senate and nearly 50-50 with Democrats in the House, almost universally, with the slightest exceptions, completely beyond Israel. So what you have is half the Congress really supporting Israel and half of it very divided.
You agree with that when you look at the when you do a bit of a head count, Debra, Shushan, that U.S. public opinion overall squarely behind Israel still on this one?
I think U.S. public opinion, and we have polling that supports this, especially when you look at the Democratic Party, of interest to me, obviously, given that I work for a Jewish American progressive lobbying organization. When you look at opinion within the Jewish American community as well, that there are so many, and the plurality, the majority, continue to support Israel, but also believe that you can support Israel and at the same time be critical of the Israeli government and critical of Israeli policies. Now, there is obviously a division between the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. There's no question about that. Daniel just spoke about that. The Republican Party has moved dramatically to the right in this regard, particularly on the Israeli-Palestinian issue. It used to be that the Republican Party was solidly behind two states. That's clearly no longer the case, very unfortunately. I mean, if you look at the shift that has happened over time from, what U.S. policy was under George H.W. Bush, even under George W. Bush, when the U.S. was actively involved with the roadmap. Obviously, that has changed dramatically to the times of Donald Trump and now to the Republican Party of today.
And on that point, let me just ask you, how many Democrats in the U.S. agree with John Whitbeck when he said just before the break that let's just give up this pretense of a two-state solution?
A very tiny minority of Democrats would take that position. The Democratic Party remains very solidly behind a two-state solution to this conflict. And of course, what we need to do is not just be rhetorically supportive of a two-state solution, which is the only way that this conflict ends, but we need to also address the underlying causes. And yes, that means putting pressure on Israel to end this 54-year occupation. I mean, as far as where the Democratic Party as a whole is, there's no question that there are divisions in the Democratic Party. But I think you can, find a sweet spot that 85 to 90% of the Democratic Party would get behind in terms of support for the two-state solution and willingness to put some pressure behind or on Israel to get there. And that's where my organization is. And that's where we're trying to focus our efforts and get Democrats to come together.